Lead from the Side is made possible thanks to our incredible sponsors. Hi, I'm Spencer Casimir, and this is Lead from the Side. Back in April, I had the opportunity to sit down with Mark Evans. Mark is best known for his leadership roles at Saracens FC, Harlequins FC, Melbourne Storm, Global Rapid Rugby, and now Fijian Drua, as well as Netball over in England. We really got to go into depth on some great leadership topics and difficulties that he had over the years and what he did to overcome many of them. I personally learned a lot and think you will too. Let's start the beginning of your career as to what took you from being a player for Saracens to coach to director to obviously a lot of C-suite CEO roles.
Well, I wasn't that good a player. Like a lot of coaches, actually, I was pretty ordinary, but I worked really hard, as hard as you could in the days when it wasn't your job and you had a lot of other things to do. Trained hard and was in quite good shape. I had very, very limited footballing ability, but I was technically quite good. And so I played a fair few games, but I was always going to coach. Right from when I was sort of late teens. I thought, no, one day I'm going to coach this game, because I thought I'd be better at it. So when I retired from playing, when I recognised, I had one of those, one of those light bulb moments.
This is happening at the time when the game is about to go professional.
No. This is about 8 years before. So I retired in 88. Had a year off. My wife tells me, I can't remember that, but I think I did. I didn't do anything, didn't coach, didn't play. And so I was always going to coach. So I started in second grade, did that for less than a year, actually, and then got promoted to the first grade as assistant coach. And then 3 years after that, got offered the head coach role, did that. And then 3 years after that, the game went pro. And I went pro with it. And as they say, that was, what was that? I don't know, goodness. That was 27 years ago. And I've sort of been hanging around professional sport ever since.
Well, here's the thing. You've been around professional sport, but in multiple different sports. Not as much cricket, but you've been as far as...
Done a little bit in cricket, a little bit in football. But I suppose the three are Union, League and Netball. And look, dominated by Union.
Let's talk about the direction of those three sports right now. What are we looking at in terms of the comfortable domestic markets? Is there growth opportunity? And in new markets, where is the growth opportunity now and what are the hurdles?
Well, rugby union is a very strange sport from a whole host of angles.
I was a scrum half. You don't have to convince me.
Yeah. Well, it has the great advantage of being played in a huge number of countries. So it's got a presence in an enormous number of markets. It has the disadvantage of having developed in a very strange way. I mean, in the book that I did with my co-author, Mike Aylwin, in 1895, when the Union and League split, Union was held like in a catapult, and it didn't really change for 100 years. So it's like rugby union got stopped there in its development, and for 100 years, all these other sports went on and made all their mistakes, and found a way around them or didn't, and all the way grew or didn't. And then in 1996 or 95, 96, that somebody released the catapult, and rugby union went straight into the 21st century and missed out the 20th. And why people wonder why that union's having such a torrid time adjusting. Well, that's why, because we're trying to concentrate all the changes that lots of other sports did in 100 years into 25. And I'm making a bit of a pig's ear of it, really, but there we are.
Do you feel that the scrum is one of those things? Because unlike rugby league,
the game itself
as well.
Yeah, I mean, look. Yes, and I think union's nearly there now. It's taken a good 15, 20 years, just like it did in rugby league, and their answer to it was pretty much to depower it and almost to get rid of it. And I think rugby league will eventually get rid of the scrum. But moving away from the sport, the actual the product, if you like, Union has it's got a lot of participants. It's a global game, and that actually causes some problems in terms of timing of the year. You know, and climate starts to play a part. Whereas I think most people in Union can agree what we ought to have, which is an integrated season between the hemispheres, whereby we shouldn't play as many games as we do because we haven't got the economic model right, and have a balance between an international and a domestic game. And that's about creating a better World Cup commercially for both codes, both of the rugby codes. That's about trying to create a more commercial World Cup, because international union and league, to different degrees, is quite predictable. You know, you can pretty much name the quarterfinalists of a rugby World Cup. You'll get 7 of the 8 right. You'll get 7 right. You know, that's why so much focus in Union. You must be the growth areas. You know, the girls you'd like to bring to the party. Well, America and Japan.
Yeah.
And we need to persevere, and we need to keep investing, because rugby doesn't have significant footprint in many countries with a large population, which was why the Japanese World Cup was so important. It's why the 31 World Cup in the USA will be so important. Though that's a much, much bigger challenge, because, you know, there is a rugby union community in the States, as you know, but it's very dispersed. It tends to be quite small in any of the in most of the cities and states, and it's a big old country, so with a lot of very popular sports. So it's going to be a real challenge, because you look at the penetration that American football's made into the UK, and it is significant. And I'm one of them. I love it. I love the game. Go Packers. And
there we go.
I don't understand all the rules. Does it matter? Not really, no, because I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the ball into the end zone, right? That's what they're trying to do. And actually, I think those of us in all sports who live and breathe it and are brought up with it, I think sometimes we overdo the importance of explanation. I really do. I think sometimes, and I had a great example. I had a great example of this when I went to the Storm. Here I am running a NRL team, not the team, obviously Craig does that, but running an NRL club. And I thought, well, I sort of got a working knowledge of this, but I don't really. I mean, what I did is I got on to Roy Masters and said, come sit by me and tell me what the hell's going on here. And obviously after a couple of years, I did feel I was in a much better. But did it make a heap of difference? It made it. I did it because it helped me do my job. But if I was just a spectator, I didn't enjoy it any more or any less, to be honest.
But I am going to talk up one thing about you did have, because you know, as we say, you were being a bit Welsh about it. I mean, you were running Harlequins and had some familiarity, at least, by bringing in London Broncos as part of the greater banner of rugby league, of Harlequins rugby league.
That's true. I just felt that London Broncos at that time had been itinerant. They were playing in football grounds where they had none of their colours were on show, and they were clearly sort of just tenants.
Right.
So I thought, well, I wonder why if we gave them, if we changed the name, and the name they played in the ground with the colours they play in, would that create a greater sense of belonging and ownership? And they had really good people. Good cut. Tony Rowe's a great guy, coach. David Hughes, the owner, was fantastic. Nick Cartwright, the CEO, was excellent. They did all the right things. It didn't work. We come now to the core of all sport, of all professional sport. Have you got an audience? Have you got an audience? And the market was telling us very, very clearly that rugby league in London didn't have an audience because the loyalty of the population is already taken. And that's why you should never underestimate how difficult it is to grow a sport in a new market. And you should never underestimate how much it might cost you to do that.
So what I'm hearing from you is that Adelaide has room for a rugby league team, and
Well,
and that the US has room for league or union, but also additionally that there seems to be room for netball.
Well, no, netball. I wouldn't say the US is aimed for net. Netball's really interesting because netball's one of those parties. It's certainly in England. I mean, look, the strongest netball nation by a long, long way is Australia, and the second one, almost equally strong pro rata, it's just a population difference, is New Zealand. It's played in quite a few countries. They tend to be Commonwealth countries. It doesn't really have any penetration in intercontinental Europe, which is interesting in itself because basketball does. Helped, of course, by social change, rise of women's sports, which we can see across a whole load of markets. But at the same time, now more competition as the rise of sports that were traditionally male, although, again, terrible generalization, ignores the massive crowds that went to women's football in the early part of the 20th century, et cetera, et cetera. But we're now seeing really strong growth across a whole range of sports. That's an opportunity for netball. It's also a competitive threat, of course. But netball's great strength is so many young women play it. It does suffer, however, in England from the same issue that basketball suffers from, which is very, very few suitable arenas to play in. And Australia, I mean, every time I go to Australia, I've been quite a lot in the last 10 years. They are so fortunate in the facilities that they are provided for by the state and federal government. It is quite extraordinary. Incredible. It's hard from a European perspective, get your head around it. And of course, a lot of Australians just take it for granted. It's just the way it is.
So we're talking about things that are pretty entrepreneurial. I'm going to pull it back to you for a moment. What do you think is the biggest innovation, whether successful or otherwise, that you've gotten to be a part of in your career?
Oh, gosh. I suppose the one that's been the most successful and has really had longevity is the big game at Twickenham. Now in its, I don't know, not sure, 14th year, 13th year, something like that.
Give a little background for people who aren't familiar with what this is.
Okay. Well, the idea was that in the European Cup, we played Stade Francais away, and they took us to the Stade de France, which is where the national team play. I think it's 80,000 capacity, and it's a club game. Now, they filled it, and the show they put on was just extraordinary. There were bull running, there were can girls. It was just one of the most extraordinary, enjoyable sporting events I'd ever been to. And I came away, and we won as well. And I came back from that, thought, we've got to be able to give that a crack in London. And so we did our research, and it was quite clear there was a Christmas audience for all sports that were where everybody came to a game because of a family thing. Groups came, so we rented Twickenham, and we put a fair bit of money behind it at risk. And first year we got 50,000 there, and second year we sold it out. And in the early days it was really very keenly priced. There were nothing free, but there were a lot of £10 tickets. It's still going. It's not £10 a ticket anymore, I can tell you. It's a very, very lucrative event to such a degree that Laurie Darrell-Limpon, who's running the joint now, is doing a second one this year. They're doing one at Christmas and one in the summer, which I think is great because it brings more people to the sport. I would say that one has stood the test of time and has been financially very, very helpful to a club in a sport where, it's very hard not to make significant losses. There are a few others, but I'd probably choose that one.
In contrast, what's one of the attempts that you made that didn't pan out?
Probably the Harlequins Rugby League thing. I had great hopes for that. I honestly thought by giving rugby league a home and a name that would be the thing that unlocked the market, but it didn't. And they did all the right things, and we gave them as much support as we could. It just didn't work, and that was a real shame. I wish it had, but there's in that well-worn phrase, you can't buck the market. And I thought it was the last throw. I thought they tried it lots of other ways and it hadn't worked. And that, I thought 5 years was a decent amount of time to give it to, sort of give it a shot. And in the end, it didn't, people just didn't want to come. And they weren't a bad team. They weren't a great team, but they weren't a bad team. They're not like they got flogged every week. They had some cracking players. It just didn't work. And that was a great shame.
So this question is going to be kind of interesting, I think, because you've not only been within, as we said, Union League, Netball. You've done this in the UK and you've done it over here as well in Australia, and you've experienced international sport in France and other countries. What are some of the biggest cultural differences that you've found between codes and countries?
Yeah, well, I don't want to overstress. I really only worked 2 markets, which is the UK and Australia. I've worked a little bit. I've done a little bit in France. The French market's really interesting, and that is different. Actually, some of the things just are the same. They really are. They do go across. I'd actually talk up the similarities rather than the difference. It is all about audience. It is, and the things that come in are right. It's price, the product, the timing, scheduling. Scheduling is incredibly important. What day, what time, all that kind of stuff. Group ticketing is an art a whole art in itself. How do you? The Americans are brilliant at it. I must say, the role of call centers and the role of outbound calling and all that kind of getting very arcane now. I think they tend to work across most markets to a greater degree than in some markets than others, but nevertheless, it's about value. It's about putting on a show that people engage with and enjoy and want to go back and repeat. And you have to, but I suppose the key thing, and I wouldn't say the cultural difference is that strong. It's if you just put on the show and don't do any outreach work, then you're going to get disappointed.
But I guess the last thing to cap off everything once and for all before I wrap the show is there anything going on that you're working on that you find interesting? And is there business advice you wish you knew sooner?
I'm working on some really quite interesting projects at the moment, both in the UK and Australia. So I'm not going to say too much about them, but yeah, I'm sort of gainfully sort of employed, and I'm interested and engaged. Is there anything I wish I'd known sooner? I suppose, I didn't come into sports as my career until I was in my mid-late 30s. So I was quite a late arrival. Part of me sort of felt I went up the coaching ladder a bit quick. And that was partly because I felt I needed to do it before I got my main career took off and I wouldn't have the time. Looking back now, if I'd known the game was going pro and there would be opportunities in that area, I might have taken it a bit slower and got a bit more experience and stayed in that sort of performance area rather than do a mixture of performance and commercial. But that's a pretty minor look back, to be honest. I've had a great run and I've been really, really lucky.
I think that's very sound advice. Mark, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. Take care, mate.
Thanks for listening today. Lead from the Side is made in partnership with Ample, and thanks to our sponsors. More information about the show and our guests can be found in the show notes. You can follow the show on Twitter or LinkedIn at Lead from the Side, or myself on Twitter or LinkedIn at BallsOutPhD. If you want to contribute to the show, send us an email at leadfromtheside@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you. See you next time, and remember to lead from the side.